Before we begin, I have a book. Did you know that? I wrote a book. This is me. I wrote a book on ugly fashion and it's coming out literally in days. You can pre-order it. I'll list links in the description. I think it's pretty sweet. So go and do that. I'm really excited for you to read it. Guys, we are so back. Finally, we get costumes that are creative but are also true to the era, thought through, cohesive, and symbolic.
It's been 84 years.
I have to say, when I saw the first screen caps of Frankenstein, it got my hopes up because it looked like at least they looked at some period paintings, you know what I mean? But also this was the case with many a period drama recently, where when I actually watched the movie, I was a little disappointed because it did not look as good as the early promotional photos made it look. So before I even watched the actual movie, there was an exhibition in London that displayed some of the costumes. Sadly, I didn't make it to see the exhibition. I literally missed it by like 2 days. But I've seen pictures of people that did go and I was like, damn, these are looking good. I think we're in for a treat. Some details in the early screen caps were very reminiscent of costumes in Crimson Peak. And first of all, that was very promising because this is peak costuming, and also B, that was no coincidence because both costumes for Crimson Peak and costumes for Frankenstein were done by Kate Hawley. So now that I've actually seen it and not just seen the pictures, let's jump into what makes Frankenstein costumes great. Even though the novel itself was published in 1818, Guillermo del Toro decided to set this adaptation around the Crimean War, so 1857. And this dating, I have to say, is followed precisely by the costumes. A lot of movies say they're set in one era, but then do something completely else with the costumes. They really were following what the fashions of the era looked like, which I think is fantastic because why pick a date if you're not gonna care about it? For example, the crinoline was patented around 1856. So by 1857 it was widely used and was around the shape that they do in the movie. Maybe it was not as back heavy, but the size and the overall shape of the skirt is pretty much on point. And the rest of the silhouette also adds up. For example, the bodices are the right fit, the right cut. We have rounded busts, we have rounded shoulders. We also have the famous pagoda sleeves that were all the rage in the 1850s, you know, those wide sleeves with slimmer or more fitted sleeves peeking from underneath. We get the round, tall, almost halo-like bonnets in the right shapes and colors and with the right decoration. We have the frequent use of shawls and just fabrics of any kind. That's also peak 1850s. We have the right undergarments even. I mean, we can't see them, but judging by the way the dresses sit, we definitely do have the right undergarments. I've said it before and I'll say it again. My favorite examples of costume design in period dramas are when the designer takes a historical silhouette and remains loyal to it, but uses it to their own advantage and sort of molds it to what they want it to be. And in many ways, this is exactly what costumes in Frankenstein do. Not only do they retain the historical silhouette while going creative with patterns and color choices, but they are also using period elements to tell the story. This one is a pet peeve of mine because every time I watch period dramas, I'm like, if you really submerge yourself in the era, there will be so many better things to do with the clothing. For example, using corset as a symbol of being oppressed in that era instead of like showing a character stumbling on her skirts constantly, or why are we never showing the ruff as the oppressive garment that it kind of was because it's really uncomfortable. You know, all these sort of nuances that you only get once you like fully research the era and that you can then use for the narrative that you're trying to show. So for example, we see most men wearing high collars as they would have done in the era, and the shirts and the collars are fantastic. But Victor Frankenstein, you know, the misfit, the one that does not fit in and is a little bit insane, he is mostly collarless throughout the story. But because they stick to the rigid rules of clothing at the time in other characters and other situations with other people, we kind of understand that it's a creative choice and it's not as jarring. Another example of sort of using those little historical historical Easter eggs to create your narrative or support your narrative would be Elizabeth's headdresses, some of them. You know, the really odd ones. They are over the top, they are mysterious, like you don't know what's going on, and yet they actually come from what was actually worn in that period. So 1850s were all about those droopy, symmetrical headdresses that will be worn on the sides of your head. And, you know, this is a perfect example of how to take something that there was definitely a pattern of wearing that during that era and then mold it to your own ideas. Make it weirder. Oh, the sun's coming up. Okay. I also love the fact that Elizabeth rewears some of her dresses because no, the female protagonist does not need a new outfit in every scene because even rich people at that time would not have that many clothes. So I love that little detail. One of the things I love is when the designer just uses the language of costume to convey the character or, you know, the film's general atmosphere. Some of the symbolic choices here may have been a little too on the nose for me, but some of them genuinely took my breath away. So throughout the film, we have direct references to the body, to the layers of the body, the structures of the body, just like what humans are made from. So we have numerous dress closures at the back that are very visible lacing that is supposed to be reminiscent of, you know, a spine. And that was also a motif in Crimson Peak, by the way. We have Victor's cream vest that looks like lungs. It's basically like embroidered in what looks like capillaries. We have his red gloves, which obviously are supposed to symbolize what he's actually doing and attempting to do. Obviously, Elizabeth's wedding dress is also heavily symbolic, and it was probably one of my favorite costumes in the movie because of that, not because of the way it looks, because of how many sort of little Easter eggs it contains. So first off, this shot, it gave me like strong Empress Sissy vibes, but I'm not sure that's intentional. But most of us know how Sissy's story ended, so it may have also been a reference to that. But also, the sleeves are very cleverly resembling a bandage pattern, sort of, which is a reference to the creature, because at that point, Elizabeth's attachment to the creature is at its peak. But also, it's a direct reference to the 1935 Bride of Frankenstein, which I think is so clever because it is such an iconic look, and obviously everyone that enjoys the lore of Frankenstein will recognize that particular dress. It also has this sort of like Swiss waist made of ribbon, which is a little bit resembling Edwardian corsets, but it's made to be worn on the outside of the bodice, which is probably supposed to mimic like a skeleton, ribs, all that stuff. It's so cool. I also love how they use this very gauzy fabric as the top layer of the wedding dress, because then the blood spills very dramatically and it sort of seeps into the dress. So you have this sort of symbolic image of life slowly leaving her body, which is very impressive. It was very impressive to watch. In general, Elizabeth is seen wearing a lot of see-through fabrics, and Kate Hawley said that she wanted her to have this vibe of like always disappearing, like she's never 100% there. So it does make her look a little ghostly in all these very light, transparent fabrics of different colors. Also, it seems to me that Guillermo loves a symbolic gothic nightgown because it just gets these female characters from just being regular women to these mystical, whimsical beings that sort of appear in the night. Speaking of symbolism, the use of color in this film is absolutely phenomenal, and it of course includes the costumes. To me personally, this is what makes them stand out. Like if someone a couple of years from now would show me pictures from that movie, I would probably not remember the movie itself, but I would be like, yes, these are Frankenstein costumes because they're just so unique in that way, the way they use color. So throughout the film, red is obviously very symbolic. It starts off with Victor's mother's clothes, then it goes through his neckties, his gloves, and also some elements of Elizabeth's wardrobe. In general, I think the tones of the costumes draw a lot from the rich shades that were used in the 1850s, especially when it comes to accessories or the combination of the colors. So there are those rich but sort of still primary colors being used, and then they're pitted against each other in the costumes. These drastic color combinations to me are the strength of the costumes because, again, it's something that would have been done back then, especially with accessories, and it's just so well made in the movie. Like somehow all these color clashes work together really well and they amplify the story. Victor is usually dressed in like reddish or purplish hues, and Elizabeth is often seen wearing contrasting greens and blues, which in turn are echoing the skin of the creature, maybe, at least like tonally, that's where I would put it at. So apart from the symbolism, there is also some very clever character building through the costumes, and that's something that I at least think is sometimes lacking in modern costume design, because we are so focused on what the costume will look like that we forget about focusing on what it conveys. For example, there are very interesting malachite style patterns used in Elizabeth's costumes that are A, a reference to malachite because it's used as an inspiration, but also B, Elizabeth's an avid reader and she reads a lot of books, she carries a lot of books around. So this is also supposed to resemble, you know, the marbling that they did in Victorian books? This is also where they got the inspiration from, which I think is brilliant. There is also a theme of insects surrounding her character. There is butterflies, but also there is this whole motif of beetles, as is reflected by this beautiful antique necklace that she's wearing. Victor, on the other hand, he starts off by looking a little disheveled, a little plain, and over time his wardrobe gets richer and it's more and more eccentric, with crazy colors, crazy patterns, crazy hats that would not have been worn normally by a gentleman in that era. In terms of historical accuracy, his look is a little punk. It's not what they would have worn, and it's probably the least in line with the 1850s dating, but you can tell it's completely intentional. And it only amplifies this idea that he's a genius and he's obviously insane, so he's completely out of place in that rigid world. It's also very interesting that he ends up sort of transforming into the creature visually at the end of the story. So I always keep my eye out for the extras and the minor characters to judge the movie on historical accuracy fully. And Frankenstein did deliver. Not only do we get well-dressed extras, we also get fantastic regional dress, and we also get Arctic stuff that I think, judging by what I've seen in photographs and museums, looks pretty good, down to the facial hair.
Sublime!
I have to say the strength of the costuming in this movie is that it's pretty contained. There aren't that many characters, there aren't many scenes that would require hundreds of costumes being made. It's really down to a few principal characters, and usually we just get glimpses of extras. So even if there are any faults, there is just not enough time to see them. Literally the only thing I can think of that stands out to me as bad in terms of the costuming in the movie is not even really a costume, it's Elizabeth's wigs. It could be the shade, it could be the fit, there's something about her hair that is not quite right, and again I'm getting flashbacks to Nosferatu and Anne's hairstyle, because that was a wig. I hate when I'm watching a movie and I'm like, that's a wig. So to sum up, see, it's possible to make beautiful historical costumes that are really heavily in line with the era that they're trying to portray. It is possible to stick to the historical silhouette while also employing unheard levels of creativity. You don't have to completely disassemble and dissect historical clothing and merge it together with modernity into a creature, may I say, that appeals to modern audience. You can and should, I think, use historical styles to your advantage. And seeing films like Frankenstein and the beauty of those costumes, I just don't really understand why people don't do it, because it looks so good. Anyway, hoping for more costumes like this in the future. Kate Hawley is the real one, y'all. That's it. Let me know what you thought, or if there are any other Easter eggs that I missed. Bye!